Welcome everyone to the launch of the Art from the Frontlines Visual Expressions for Medical Professionals during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Azalea Camacho. I'm the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian here at Cal State L.A, and I will serve as your host this evening. We would like to start off with the land acknowledgement read by Adele Daubry, Health Sciences Librarian.
Thank you for the introduction. With great respect, Cal State L.A. acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tovangar, the Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Cal State L.A. is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives, relations, past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State L.A. more accountable to the needs of American Indian peoples. And now Dean Rodriguez of the University Library will share his remarks.
Thank you, Adele. Good evening, everyone. As Adele mentioned, my name is Carlos Rodriguez, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as Dean of the University Library here at Cal State L.A. On behalf of the library faculty and staff, I'd like to welcome you to the opening of the virtual exhibit of the Art from Frontlines exhibit, Visual Expressions from Medical Professionals during the COVID-19 pandemic. The University Library has historically been deeply committed in providing opportunities for the campus and the broader community to engage and showcase the scholarly and creative works of not only the Cal State community, but of the surrounding community. And we've done this through collaborative programs, events, and exhibits such as the one that we opened today. During the past year, unfortunately, we were unable to have any in-person exhibits, but we've been able to quickly transition to a lot of online programming and a lot of exhibits. And we've invested a lot of resources to really provide infrastructure to support these type of digital exhibits that you're going to be seeing today. This marks the third digital exhibit that we were able to launch this past year. Of course, these exhibits don't happen by themselves, so I'd like to really thank many folks in the library who's put in many hours in developing this amazing exhibit. In particular, I'd like to thank Elijah Billy, who's our Special Collections and Archives volunteer, Reyes Gama, who's a library intern, and also Blanca Godines, who's also a library intern, Kelsey Brown, who's a communications strategist and event coordinator for helping coordinate the program, Azalea Camacho, who's our archivist and special collections librarian, Adele Daubry, who's our health sciences librarian, and Jamie Zeffrey, who's our digitizations project assistant. I would also like to play a special thanks to Dr. Ali Tayyeb from the School of Nursing, who really played an important role in really bringing this idea to us. So thank you, Dr. Tayyeb, for bringing this idea to the library, because it's without these relationships, these collaborative relationships, and particularly the ideas that the campus brings, really we can't really put on these great exhibits. And of course, this exhibit really showcases the creative works and expressions of the talented healthcare professionals from across the country. And we also have a few from Spain. So really, this is truly an international exhibit. And so hopefully, I think there's one or two from Spain that are participating today. And you'll have an opportunity to see their art later today. The healthcare professionals included in the exhibit include Dr. Ali Tayyeb, like I mentioned, from the Cal State Patricia Ace Chin School of Nursing. Also, Dr. Grace Ferris, who's a physician at Dell Medical School in Austin. Marina Pix Asensio, who's a pediatric nurse from the University Hospital of Cruces in Bilbao, Spain. Dr. Michael Nader, who's a third year internal medicine resident in New York City. MK Czerwiec, who's a registered nurse, and also I understand is also referred to as a comic nurse of graphic medicine, and Tolo Villalonga, who's a pediatric nurse specialist from Mallorca, Spain. This past year really has been very challenging for all of us. The impact has been felt really across the globe, but it was really our healthcare professionals who really were on the front lines, and they experienced this day in, day out, often hours on hours, really dealing with these difficult experiences. And I'm sure these experiences have had a long-lasting impact on them. The work that they do and they continue to do is truly selfless and heroic. So really, it's a big thank you to, if we have any healthcare professionals who are attending today, deep gratitude and appreciation for the work that you do and continue to do to really take care of us during these really difficult and challenging times. So thank you very much for the work that you all do. The digital exhibit that we opened today features, like I mentioned, the artwork created by these healthcare professionals during the COVID-19 pandemic. That also includes in-depth interviews with the artists. Through these interviews and these discussions that we've had with them, we really take a deeper look into the struggles that they faced every day, and not just them, but obviously everyone in the healthcare industry. We saw a lot of these interviews, and as this was unraveling, across the globe. And the way they, handle this obviously varied from person to person, but some of the examples that you see today is through their arc. This was just in a way of really expressing the challenges and what they were feeling and thinking during this time. So really the exhibit really places a human face on the important work that these essential workers really did over this past year. And in many ways, really, it's another way for us to show our appreciation for the amazing work that they did over this past year. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this virtual exhibit. Again, thanks again to the organizers, and a special thanks to the artists who are going to be part of this exhibit. Thanks again for attending the virtual opening exhibit.
Thank you, Dean Rodriguez, for your remarks. And now we're going to hear from the Director of School of Nursing, Dr. Gail Washington.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to attend this magnificent exhibit today. I'd like to give you a little short summary or chronology of what's been going on with the School of Nursing since the onset of COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic for the last 1.5 years has disrupted the normalcy of all our lives, and the School of Nursing in particular, because we were trying to balance the safety of students and also to achieve their successful academic progression. We have 15 different programs, and along with the university, began remote teaching on March 20th of 2020. We were in uncharted waters without life jackets. This was an unprecedented time with an incredible challenge for human survival and existence. Hospitals began to suspend clinical rotations. School of Nursing students said that they didn't, sign up for this. They wanted face-to-face. They wanted their faculty right there with them. But of course, they understood, and we rose to the occasion. A few of the sites suspended the clinical rotations, and a few sites, because they were overwhelmed, accepted students as volunteers and externs. This was kind of a paradox, because here there was a need for healthcare workers, and they were on the front lines, yet our students who wanted to participate and who had a certain amount of training were not being sought after initially. The School of Nursing, after adhering to strict guidelines imposed by CDC and the LAPD and the LA Public Health Department and the University Risk Management Department, was the only students allowed for face-to-face campus training. So consequently, the nursing students were on this huge campus by ourselves in a small little clinical lab, still pursuing the academic knowledge that was needed for them to render healthcare. After receiving approval from the California BRN, simulation was instituted. We were using teaching strategies that varied according to the level of experience of our students. The undergraduate students had simulation platforms. Our advanced practice nursing students used telemedicine alongside preceptors to render patient care. Student celebratory annual events had to be canceled. Some of these events included the Sigma Theta Tau induction, the Phi Kappa Phi induction, our ceremonial white coat ceremony, our pinning ceremony, and of course, commencement was canceled. Not until January 2021, the clinical sites started offering COVID vaccines to students. As a result, students volunteered, and they were asked to volunteer to give vaccines to the public. Clinical face-to-face rotations in facilities resumed, but we were in decreased numbers. Rather than the usual 10 to 12 students that we usually had, only 5 students were allowed in most clinical facilities. Students were using extensively their protective equipment and personal protective devices. And as of today, students have not contracted COVID-19 from their clinical rotations. Our students were brave, they were selfless, and they weathered the storm with the use of multiple coping strategies. They used journaling, yoga, meditation, and the empathetic support of their classmates, their family, and their faculty. Our students were committed, dedicated, and they are truly resilient. And as we move slowly to transitioning to a new normal, I believe that the art displayed here today exhibits the bond shared in our human experiences of an uncertainty. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this exhibit.
Thank you, Dr. Gail Washington, for your remarks. And now we will follow up with remarks from one of our featured artists and our very own Dr. Tayyeb from the School of Nursing.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to take a minute to thank a list of people that have really made the exhibit possible, and I appreciate you humoring me with a few minutes to do so. I'm going to start with thanking all the healthcare workers that have and continue to do the work taking care of our communities. That includes a long list of faculty and students here at Cal State L.A. and around the globe. I want to thank the 14 healthcare workers that donated their stethoscopes specifically to my project, and the 45 donors that supported the project financially. I'm going to also thank my wife for allowing me to take over the garage for the last year. The art piece still sits there. I'm going to thank Miss Barbara Glickstein, a colleague of mine from the East Coast that connected me with MK Czerwiec, aka Comic Nurse, who is also one of the featured artists here today. Last year for my podcast, but as a result and her international connections that she generously shared with me, we were able to contact individuals that graciously agreed to be part of the exhibit. And with that said, I want to again thank MK, Grace, Michael, Marina, Prescription Cartoons, Alex, and Tolo for their willingness to donate specific pieces from their collection so we can share it with everybody. I thank you for your generosity and your time. If anybody, there's links to all of the artists that are going to be featured here on the library's website. So I highly recommend the work that the artists share. There's so much more. So I hope you follow them on their websites and their social media sites. I want to thank the University Office of Communications and Public Affairs for covering my story last year that has led to multiple coverages in newsprint and media outlets since that eventually brought me here. I want to thank Ms. Kimberly Payne, who was the HHS Director of Development that connected me with the University Library. And finally, a thank you to the University Library, Dean Rodriguez, Azalea Camacho, Kelsey Brown. Azalea and Kelsey have been incredible to work with over the past few months. And I'm going to, Dean Rodriguez, if you can give the whole crew a raise, I highly recommend that. If you could do that, that'd be fantastic. Adele Dobry, Jamie Zeffrey, Blanca Godines, Reyes Gama, and Elijah Billy. And if I slaughtered anybody's last name, I apologize. But again, I just want to thank everybody for making this happen. I wasn't expecting this to be as elaborate and as big as it is. And I'm so thankful for your willingness and giving us a platform to share the work, because the work really comes from the heart, from I think all the artists, and I appreciate you providing the platform for us to share it. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali Tayyeb. You were also very wonderful to work with, and all the artists that you connected us with. It was great to work with all of you. And I think we have some ideas for your art piece in the library, maybe, right, Dean Rodriguez? Maybe we could have a feature in the library at some point when we're back on campus. But now I'd like to hand it over to Kelsey Brown, who's my colleague, and she's also the communication strategist and events coordinator of the University Library, to start the virtual walkthrough of the exhibit.
Thanks, Azalea. I'm so excited. We're so happy that this has all come to fruition. We first want to thank our artists profusely, who, without their involvement, we wouldn't have an exhibit to curate and illustrate the experiences of not just medical professionals, but also patients and their families throughout this pandemic. We appreciate their generosity with their time and their donation of their pieces to this project. We'll be sharing with you the galleries of each artist and to tell you a little bit about them and show a few select pieces of their work. Through the process of curating, we had the pleasure of interviewing most of the participating artists, and in doing so, created short videos of their experiences that will also play for you. We hope that hearing firsthand accounts on the artists' voices will add a level of personability to the galleries, as well as their impactful stories. We invite you to come back after this event tonight and browse the galleries at your leisure. If any of our artists are here with us tonight and want to jump in during their presentation, please feel free to send us a message or raise your hand. We'll make you a panelist right then and there, and we'll get you right on the mic so we can have you talk during your gallery. Additionally, we have a few artists who are joining us, so if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, and if time permits, we'll do our best to get to a Q&A at the end of the ceremony. So first, let's start off with MK Czerwiec. MK Czerwiec is a nurse, cartoonist, educator, and co-founder in the field of graphic medicine. She co-manages the website, podcasts, annual conferences, and online community of graphicmedicine.org. Her various works include Taking Turns, Stories from HIV/AIDS Care Unit 371, Graphic Medicine Manifesto, and Menopause, a Comics Treatment. MK is also the comics editor for the journal Literature and Medicine. MK regularly teaches graphic medicine at several colleges and universities across the country. She began her nursing career in Chicago, working in a designated AIDS ward in the 1990s. Let's hear a little bit from MK about that time, as well as how art helped her cope through those challenges.
I was a nurse during the AIDS crisis in the 90s, and the peak of kind of deaths from AIDS was about a year after I started working as a nurse on a dedicated AIDS unit in Chicago. So I was a new nurse, was very young, this was completely overwhelming, and I didn't know how to cope. And I would write in journals, but then that felt like it was just all too much at once. I would make drawings or paintings that then I felt that wasn't telling the whole story. So one day, literally out of desperation, to be able to go to work at 3 o'clock and do my shift and not still be upset about things that had happened the night before and losses we'd experienced, I just drew this picture of myself. And I think I wrote over it like, I'm miserable. And I put a box around it. And I was like, oh, this is a comic. I guess I'm making a comic. And I didn't start with that intention. But much to my surprise, 9 panels later, it really did what I needed it to do. I found myself in a place of hope with a whole new perspective on the situation. And I was ready to go to work and be present. And I felt like I'd found a place for my own grief. I make comics about what I'm going through to help me process and understand those things. Comics are an incredibly powerful medium. Comics are basically image and text combined sequentially to tell a story. And when you think about that, applied to things that are difficult, things that are traumatic, It's incredibly powerful because it gives you the ability to, first of all, have agency over difficult experiences over which you maybe don't have agency. You decide how things are shown, what's not shown, you decide what happens. And you have to sort of make real in the world things that maybe are just stuck in your head, like your anxieties. You have to figure out how do I represent those? How do I make them almost sometimes amusing, right? Or how do I make them true to what I'm experiencing? And then in the end, it's no longer just here. It's actually on a piece of paper and I can potentially walk away from that, right? I've sort of organized it and I can walk away. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it go away, but it gives it a place. And so for me, that's really useful. And I've done a lot of work in that way through COVID of dealing with all of the anxieties and stressors.
Looking at MK's donated art, we see
I was
her
a
piece.
nurse during the AIDS crisis.
If you can hear a plane, by the way, I apologize, I live near an airport. So looking at her donated art here, we see her piece titled Neruda in Quarantine. Here she's taken Pablo Neruda's poem, Keeping Quiet, and set it to scenes from the pandemic's early months of quarantine. The poem discusses the importance of maintaining peace and silence for reflection, which shows kindness upon human beings, animals, and the environment. He suggests that in order to maintain peace and harmony, at some point we must stop and be introspective.
And our next artist is Dr. Grace Ferris, who is a doctor, mother, and illustrator who lives in Austin, Texas. While an undergraduate, she wrote and illustrated a daily comic strip called Coup de Grace that was published in Brown Daily Herald from 2001 to 2004. Dr. Ferris practiced internal medicine in Boston and then taught courses in clinical medicine at Harvard Medical School before becoming chief of Division of Hospital Medicine at Mount Sinai West in New York City. As a result, when the pandemic hit, Dr. Farris had to separate from her children for weeks as she was still actively seeing COVID-19 patients. As a cartoonist, she took her Coup de Grace comic to social media and now runs an Instagram page dedicated to visual storytelling about working in the medical field, being a mom, and the intersection of those two parts of her life. In this video, Dr. Ferris walks us through two of her pieces, Love in the Time of Coronavirus and How to Be Friendly While Wearing a Mask.
This first one, Love in the Time of Coronavirus, is, I think it's from April of 2020. And I wrote it for a website that I contribute to called Cup of Joe, which is a women's lifestyle blog. This was during the time when, it was right at the beginning of everything being conducted over Zoom. I knew a few babies who were born around this time. And so one baby was born around March 9th, and everything was kind of normal. People got to visit. At the hospital where I was working was a huge birthing center. After that was when one of my colleagues ended up having a baby where even her husband wasn't allowed to attend the birth. And so she had to kind of conduct all of that over FaceTime and Zoom. Yeah. And so it was thinking about different ways you were kind of expressing connection and love, through these different portals, and then also the collegiality of being at work. And I did feel it was such a intense time. And so I think that there were many different times where people would be anxious and you'd be supporting them, and then someone would say, we're all in this together. And so it was a very, very intense time. And this is another one, I think from May of 2020, and when we were just thinking about how to start wearing masks, and how you can't smile at anyone anymore. You really have to smize aggressively.
I love the smize, and then her eyes are like bees.
Yeah.
I love that. And you have to wave maniacally, not just wave, but maniacally.
I still think you do, because I'm pretty soft-spoken. So if I say hello, there's a good chance that someone's not hearing me. So you really have to dial it up with your reactions when you're wearing a mask.
And a lot of Dr. Ferris' work is lighthearted, like this piece, Pandemic Fashions, which is basically just different forms of pajamas. Let's see if we can get it better. There you go. Here's the next piece. But some also have a poignant message, like this piece, New Words, that creates new vocabulary words as a result of living together through the pandemic.
Dr. Michael Nader is a current endocrinology fellow at NYU Bellevue in New York City. He's a visual artist, physician, and also a patient. He has been living with type 1 diabetes since age 9. His background in studio art has allowed him to approach medicine through a non-traditional lens, and he uses art to help learn, teach, and cope with medical topics and training. Dr. Natter aims to humanize the process of medical training, provide empathetic, top-notch care to each of his patients, and use his creativity to teach, explain, and practice the art of medicine. In the spring of 2020, Dr. Natter was working in New York City. Here, he found himself at the center of the pandemic's early stages. In his interview, he talked about the toll it took on his mental health, as well as the importance of graphic medicine as a means of inclusive communication.
You know, I think dealing with so much death, the volume of death and the way in which these people were dying and doing so alone was really difficult. And I think that has left some pretty deep scars that I still think I'm processing and dealing with. So just in general, I'd say that was pretty horrific. I know that at my program, they do have these kind of counseling sessions and opportunities to kind of meet with therapists and so on. For me, you know, and I'm actually actively looking for a therapist currently, but for me, my art has always been very cathartic for me. And so I kind of came back to drawing when I would come back from a tough shift or when I was going through some stuff. I think having a therapist is good for everyone, but especially when, you know, dealing with these kinds of traumas, I think it's important. I always thought I was an artist, but one of my artist friends said to me, "You're an illustrator." And I said, "Oh, I am an illustrator, aren't I?" Like I really wanted, I think I wanted to be thought of as a fine artist, but even though that's what I was drawing, kind of like, you know, studying in undergrad, when you meld in, you know, the purpose of why you're illustrating something in terms of if you're trying to show something, medicine is a complex language that I had to basically translate into my own visual jargon in order to understand it. And, you know, I also like to make the analogy to IKEA furniture comes with a instruction booklet that's entirely in pictures and has no words. And what that does is it breaks down any barriers to language issues, to reading issues, to education level, to really anything. And it makes it understandable. I don't see why medicine shouldn't be that for initially for myself, but then for the patients, for medical students, for residents, and so on. And so that's what my goal typically is when I'm trying to illustrate something. And for me, the best kind of vehicle for that, especially now since things like social media are all digital, is quick, simple illustrations, and digital illustrations kind of have that appeal. And now with the technology, you can draw the same way you would draw on paper effectively on a screen, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it.
Dr. Natter's work varies in types, as you can see here, from portraits to lighthearted comics to confessional type pieces like this 4-panel series about a decontamination ritual after coming home from a shift. I have a decontamination routine when I get home from the hospital, attempts to wash off the virus that's very likely coating every surface. But while I systematically scrub off this invisible monster, sterilizing, freeing my body from its evil grasp, I know that the human toll of what we are all a part of will never fully wash off. Even long after this horrible nightmare ends, there will be emotional scars that I fear I will carry for years to come.
So now we'll move on to Marina Pix, who is a pediatric nurse and illustrator working in the pediatric intensive unit care in the University Hospital of Cruces, Bilbao, Spain. She was introduced to art at a young age thanks to her parents, and she has always tried to connect both worlds, caring and art, into one single piece. She is the author of the recently published study, Graphic Medicine and Pediatric Nursing, analyzing the use of comics to improve parents' knowledge and abilities in children's respiratory care, as well as a comic book called Achus, about caring for respiratory systems. Nowadays, she dedicates her life not just to the care of children, but also to the creation of visual art that shows the daily life and challenges of nurses. Early in the pandemic, Nurse Pix was moved from a world she was very familiar with, pediatric care, to care for adults at the beginning of the pandemic in her overcrowded hospital in Spain. In this video, she talks about the challenge of being short-staffed, as well as what she hopes to accomplish with her art.
The pandemic stopped everybody's lives, and I was doing my residence programs in pediatrics. And when everything started, we were sent back to our hospitals because they needed, all the nurses were needed in COVID wards. So they sent us to a ward that was made in the middle of the corridors and the waiting rooms of my hospital. We came from the babies world, and then we were changed to adults. There were lots of people, like too many people, that we didn't have time for everyone. There was no oxygen for everyone. There were people standing in chairs for more than 24 hours. They were asking us if they could sit down on the floor. And then I remember the first day that we were 2 nurses, and we went to the room and they told us, you have 23 patients under your control. Try your best. If something goes wrong, only one of them is gonna have a room in the ICU. For everyone else, the only thing you're gonna be able to do is give them medication, give them 100% oxygen, give them morphine, make them comfortable. The heaviest part was like knowing that people were dying alone without their families, and there was nothing you could do. I mean, you were working 3 times what you usually did, and it was not enough. You had your family at home, you couldn't see them, and they were like, okay, keep yourself safe, stay at home. What's going on in the news, it was like real for me, but it was very hard to tell people. You were not seeing what was happening in the hospital. You couldn't really believe it. Like, is this really happening? Yes, it is happening. But you don't want to tell everyone. I mean, you don't want to tell your friends or your family how bad things you are seeing or you're suffering, because you don't want to say that, right? I guess when I started the residence program in pediatrics, I had a lot of things to say, and I wanted to tell a lot of the stories, and I was one of the ways I could do that. The same things happened in the pandemic. It was like, oh my God, there's so many things going on. I have to say this, I have to express this somehow and let the people know. It's not like I want to tell how horrible things are. Even the worst things, I try to put them in a kind of naive or cute way, but trying to also express the reality.
This piece, titled A veces es como estar en otro planeta, or sometimes it's like being in another planet, details 2 medical professionals looking at Earth from planet COVID, a feeling many medical professionals around the world must have shared. Similarly, this piece is captioned, Hay cajas que esperas no tener que volver a abrir. There's boxes you never hope to open again. But Nurse Pix's work also highlights the hope embodied by many during the pandemic, that we would eventually find a light at the end of the tunnel. And in the meantime, we would safely share love with friends and family.
Prescription Cartoons is a nurse practitioner, ICU RN, and adjunct professor in New York with over 10 years in the hospital setting. Their hospital was one of the first in the nation to be affected by the pandemic, and at one point had over 300 COVID positive patients. Since the beginning of the pandemic, they have been deployed to the COVID ICU, have worked with the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the National Guard. After stumbling upon other graphic medicine artists online, they started an Instagram account and posted their first drawing in December of 2020. Not having drawn in over 12 years, never one portrait and never digital, they weren't sure how the experiment would go. quickly gaining a following. Their drawings resonated with others facing similar challenges during the pandemic. We're actually really excited to feature prescription cartoons as they reached out to us to be involved in the exhibit. So we really felt like the timing worked out perfectly, and we're eager to share their work with you all. Prescription cartoons is a lot of memeing about the medical profession, but they also do many portraits from colleagues based on photographs in the field, like this one. An illustration of a medical professional taking a break in a stairwell during a shift. We also have this one here of a registered respiratory therapist with several types of masks dangling from around her neck. They also commemorated an incredible milestone with an original design, 100 million vaccinated in the US in mid-March of this year. That's the day that we hit 35 million fully vaccinated and 66 million who had received their first dose.
Dr. Tayyeb is a double alum of Cal State L.A. and a United States Navy veteran, having served as a United States Navy Fleet Marine, Force Corpsman, and Naval Medical Center, San Diego. After his military service, Dr. Tayyeb pursued his career as a registered nurse, earning a bachelor's and master's degree in nursing from Cal State L.A. and his PhD from the University of San Diego. Dr. Tayyeb's experience in healthcare field include combat trauma, emergency medicine, education, human patient simulation, professional development, leadership, veterans healthcare, and policy. Dr. Tayyeb is currently an assistant professor at Cal State L.A. and is the creator, producer, and host of the RN Mentor podcast and blog. Last summer, he set out on a mission to create a large format art piece to chronicle the lack of PPE during the pandemic, as well as its toll on the medical professionals. In his interview, he told us about his inspiration for this piece.
I started calling it the Health Professionals Memorial Art Project. I'm very much what I call a doodler. I always doodle on paper, whether I'm sitting at a meeting or if I'm at a conference. I'm always drawing something. Art has been around with me, but I've primarily done drawings. But this one I saw when COVID happened. I started seeing people put information out there on PPEs. I started seeing it in social media. There was a shortage of it. I started noticing that. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? This is not normal. And that turned into a huge personal protective equipment shortage across the board worldwide. The regulations started getting relaxed on what nurses and healthcare professionals can use. And that was concerning. The fact that people were starting to reuse personal protective equipment, that was concerning. And I started just sketching some stuff on paper. And I'm like, you know what? It's not going to have the same impact. So I ended up doing the sort of a sculpture, have a 3-dimensional sculpture, which ended up being the final product. It went through variations, and it took me an entire summer to complete it. And I put in a lot of hours to do it, but it really was not only a way for me to contribute, but to make sure that we're still talking about this. I wanted this to be an ongoing conversation and make sure that we're addressing things like PPE shortages, all the healthcare workers that have died in the US as a result of COVID, that we still continue to remember all the healthcare workers that were in the front lines and continuing to do the work. The reality is none of us signed up to do healthcare without the proper equipment, right? I always tell people we don't send our military folks into battle without guns and bullets and all the protective equipment. The expectation should not be any less or any more from healthcare workers that, yes, we are sending them into rather stressful, dangerous situations, but it should be with the proper equipment that we know they should have in order to protect themselves, protect their families, and protect the community.
And Dr. Tayyeb is here with us tonight, and we'd like to turn it over to him for some insight of his featured work as we walk through his gallery. So
Thank you.
If there's a specific piece you want me to zero in on, let me know.
I think we can probably any one of the sculpture ones. I think that's the main piece that I think I can talk about. Yeah, so I mean, I really want to talk about this because it really wasn't me doing this. It really was a contribution from many individuals. Like I said, 40. Just because I knew this was going to cost a little bit, I put out a GoFundMe, and 45 between family, friends, colleagues from across the country donated what they could. And that made this piece possible. It really came from me wanting to look at the headlines. And if you look at this piece, it's filled with the headlines that actually I saw in the news, and whether it was the healthcare professionals that were dying from across the world. It was about the lack of PPE. It was the stress and the trauma that the healthcare workers were experiencing. And it was all the news. And actually, it's just a huge paper mache type of a thing, something I hadn't done other than for my kids, I mean, on a much smaller scale. But so this really came from me experimenting in a way, and it's made out of newsprint paper because it was news that was coming across, whether it was social media or on TV. So I just started looking for these things, and I saw some really I saw a theme just across the world, and we started seeing things like healthcare workers with gag orders being placed on them, and institutions telling them not to speak of the shortages. And we saw, as I mentioned in the video, we started seeing shortages and reuse of PPEs. And the whole thing was really inspired by one of my former students that sent me a picture of her mask in a Ziploc bag with her name on it that she had to use for the entire week. These all go against what we teach our students. So in a way, I felt I really felt frustrated. And then that time I felt angry because this is not how we do business. And it was really the frustration from that. The stethoscopes in this piece, and actually, I see Dr. Wanda Montalvo, who's chiming in on the chat. Her stethoscope is one of the ones that were donated, and I want to thank her for that. But we have these stethoscopes that are on here were really representation of the healthcare workers that are out there. Some of these stethoscopes are 20, 30 plus years old. Some people shared their first stethoscopes, some of our Cal State L.A. A couple of them are actually donations from our Cal State alums. Students of mine that have graduated that gave their stethoscopes to the project. The plexiglass cover is not just to cover the stethoscopes, but also kind of representation of the plexiglass world we entered when the pandemic hit, where all the plexiglass everywhere, all of our interactions were behind plexiglass, whether it was a face shield or whether we're dealing with at the supermarket or anywhere where we're going. So the whole piece was really not only representation of everything that was going on, but I've always said I never did the art for the sake of art, but I did the art for the sake of the communication, of making sure I'm getting the message out of what's going on. And we continue to talk about this because we never want to be in this situation again, where we are sending our healthcare workers into the field without the proper equipment. So I really, like I said, I really want to do a piece that was more than a paper that was in a journal somewhere or a news piece that was going to sit somewhere, but I really wanted to make it visual, impactful. And that's why I went away from my comfort zone, which is my pen on an iPad, to something that was more three-dimensional, a little bit more in your face, and hopefully we'll find a home for it. And so it's not sitting in my garage. My wife will thank you for that as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Dr. Alex Thomas is a pediatric allergist, immunologist, cartoonist, and illustrator with more than 20 years of experience. He is the creator of Iggy and the Inhalers, an award-winning comic-based educational program that teaches kids about asthma. Dr. Thomas co-founded Booster Shot Media, a company that educates people of all ages about complex health topics using the power of comics. He has presented on the use of comics in health education extensively over the years, including Comic-Con International. He also teaches at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Medicine, where he teaches clinical applications of graphic medicine to medical students. When not graphic medicining, he continues to see patients in his allergy practice in Chicago. Dr. Thomas had the unique and frightening experience of contracting COVID along with his whole family. And here he talks about that experience, as well as important it is to use the art to communicate complex topics in medicine.
For me, the art and the medicine in my life are completely bound to each other. They're not separate. The practice of medicine, so much of it is an art, and so much of it is a nuanced kind of, you just have a feeling you're asking the right question, or you want to ask this next question because of how you're responding to a patient, and there's a real art in that. And on the other side of it, there's a real science to art, and there's a lot of kind of technical understanding and proficiency with tools and things like that. So for me, both neurons on each side are interacting with each other, and so the work I create, I want it to be both expressive but also correct and technically accurate. Because that's kind of what my mind, is thinking. I really felt like in the beginning, that's when I felt the most compelled to do it, because I felt like there was a disconnect in the very beginning of the pandemic where at least healthcare workers, myself and others, we felt like something bad was about to happen. And I didn't feel like anyone else in like the general public or the media had a full understanding of it. And so I felt like saying the sky was falling, it just felt like I needed to get a word out that things were getting scary. And so right in the beginning, I felt like I needed to start communicating. And then once kind of the pandemic really hit and it was really affecting everyone in such a dramatic way, then it was more about kind of, communicating my own personal experiences, because halfway through the pandemic, me and my family all got COVID. So that became part of my experience with it. Was there were a couple scares, and then we all got it. And then I, was the sickest of everyone in the family, but still not that sick. But I mean, it was one of those things where it was kind of scary for several days, where we, we're just kind of planning worst case scenario. If me and my wife are very sick, who will watch our kids who also have COVID? Like just really very basic questions that we didn't have an answer to. And that truly illuminated how I cared for my patients who also were struggling with COVID. And it made me understand like why so many people were not showing up to the ER until they were like on death's door, because like, how do you get childcare when everyone in the house has COVID? It's crazy.
Dr. Thomas is also here with us tonight, so we'd like to welcome him too to talk about any of his pieces.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, so it's funny looking the way the pictures are arranged here. It kind of goes through my experience with COVID. So the first three are drawings of masks that I made at the start of the pandemic. This first one was my first N95 mask, and I'm in a very small private practice, so we have no support from any institution. So at the start of the pandemic, we literally had to scramble, and we meaning me, had to scramble to find PPE just for my staff and myself. And so in the beginning, it was really hard to find. So my first N95 mask, I actually was donated to me from a friend of mine who knew that I was desperate to find one. And I used this for way longer than I should have. But it really was like my lifeline to allow me to feel comfortable to continue to see, our patients who we've cared for decades. So then finally, I went on to the next mask, which is the next picture. And this one was the KN95 mask, which I finally was able to get, a box of them so I could kind of, not stick with one for way too long. But this one I, noted that, and as all of us, using masks kind of realized that some were better at fogging up your glasses than others, and some made you feel, more claustrophobic than others. So this one is good, but always made me, made my glasses fog up. So then I contrasted that with the third mask picture that we have here. And this mask actually belonged to a patient of mine. So this is kind of around the time that I was drawing masks and perseverating about the quality of my N95 mask that I finally got, when I saw a patient who had a 3-month history of a chronic cough. And I found that he was a metal worker who worked in a factory grinding metal. And his cough started around the time that his employer stopped providing them N95 masks because they had run out, nationally. And so then this company decided that their own employees were responsible for getting their own masks. So when I asked him what mask he used at work, he pulled out this crumpled old surgical mask. And so then it hit me that, in the struggle for PPE, we also didn't realize that there were other people who were needing it for very important reasons before then. And as we were focusing on COVID, we're forgetting about workers who were putting their lives at risk, keeping the country going without proper protection for their own occupation. So then the next image was just kind of, so when I had COVID, I got COVID in November, and I started drawing comics about it while I was sick with it. And then this final comic was about when I finally got vaccinated. And just it dealt with kind of the somber feeling that I and all the other healthcare workers in the hospital had when we were getting it, because I was seeing a lot of people posting these, selfies of them getting the shot with all smiles, and it didn't feel that way when I got it. And everyone seemed very quiet and just wanting to get this over with and feel safe. And that's kind of what this comic was about.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next, we have Tolo Villalonga, who is a specialist nurse in pediatrics from Mallorca, Spain, and is an associate professor in the nursing faculty of the University of Balearic Islands. He is a member of the Spanish-speaking group of graphic medicine. For the past 4 years, he also worked in the technical office of the primary care management of Mallorca, attempting to convey knowledge visually. He is the creator of the project Consultation for Corners of Health, as well as the Instagram account PictoNurse, a space to highlight the nursing profession. This piece is titled Fin del año para un profesional sanitario, end of the year for a healthcare professional. Here, Nurse Villalonga illustrates the exhaustion felt by those on the front lines of the pandemic. On the screen, COVID rises, as do positivos, positive test results, and fallecidos, deaths. Nurse Villalonga's gown, mask, face shield, and gloves are all discarded around him. This one highlights the public's view on the virus, how the news was around us 24/7. And for so long, it was all that we were focused on.
So this concludes our walkthrough, everyone. That's basically all of our artists that have contributed. So we want to thank all of you. We have a few minutes left, so we'd like to open it up for any artists that want to jump in on the mic. Just raise your hand and I can promote you to a panelist. No pressure, but in case you want to. And if you're a guest, if you have any questions for our artists who are here tonight, feel free to raise your hand, or you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we can do that. In the meantime, do we have any other additional comments from anybody? Any closing thoughts? Maybe not. I want to thank everyone who came today, everybody who I shared on social media. Thank you for tagging us. I saw all of that. Thank you. All of our artists who are a part of the exhibit, we thank you so much. We will be on, recording will be on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat right now. So if you do want to subscribe to us, I'm going to can't talk and type at the same time. Here we go. Here's our YouTube channel address that you can subscribe and let us know, or you can get a notification when it gets uploaded. Other than that, that's all that we have for you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.